So, in today's session, we're going to be talking about starting early and what that means and why it's important. And it's something that I think we probably should think about doing. We're going to break that down into a couple of different sections. So, we'll talk about why behind the concept first. Why should we be starting earlier? What's the reason behind all of this? Then I'm going to unpack it a little bit more and go through the different stages of career development that we see being involved, particularly in that childhood phase. And then talk about why we can't just simplify what we already do in secondary school. There's an awful lot that happens within a secondary school context around career education, and that's awesome. But we can't just kind of simplify those things and bring them down to primary school. And I'm going to go through those as well and explain what all that's about. And then lastly, I'm going to cover some of the things that we're trying to do about it and that we think that other people can do about it as well if they're interested in getting involved. So that's kind of what we're going to be covering today. We've got 30 minutes and there'll be some time for questions at the end. So I wanted to start out by asking, how early do we start talking about jobs and work with children? So if you've got any thoughts about that, I'd love it if you'd have a little reflection, maybe share that with us as well. But how early do you think we start? How early, what is the first point at which you think we start talking about jobs and work with children? Why should we be starting early? So we know that what happens in those really early years is really important for the building strong foundations. I love this quote about comparing career development in the early years to the gardener preparing their soil, because that's really what we're doing when we're talking about working with younger children who haven't hit high school yet and who haven't hit particularly those latter stages of high school, is that we're just preparing our soil. We're talking to the young people. We're making sure they've got really great, strong foundations. They've got really great, robust ideas about what might be out there. And that's what we're trying to do in those early years, not necessarily trying to fast forward the process or make them do things earlier than they otherwise would. It's just about preparing our soil for future career development. And we know that there's a couple of things. There's two things in particular that we talk about when we talk about starting early that we want to see happen. And one of them is challenging stereotypes. So career stereotypes are a really big thing, and I'm going to go over that a little bit more in a minute. But it's really important to recognize that career stereotypes actually start really, really, really early, like with little brand new babies. Sometimes even before babies are born, parents start talking about the kind of careers their future offspring might do one day. And all of those things, we don't think that they have any impact, or we don't necessarily recognize that they have impact, but they do. They do have really strong impact. For example, I just looked at a major retailer looking for some baby outfits. These are both very cute. The one that is color-coded for girls, it wasn't branded for girls, but it's color-coded for girls, is pink, has little soft flowers on it. It's very soft and pretty. The one that is color-coded for boys is blue and has wild animals on it. So that we're already seeing that girls are soft and pretty and feminine, and boys are strong and adventurous and wild. And those sorts of messages, even when these are babies who don't recognize what they're wearing, they do start to have an impact on the decisions that we make down the track. There's been some work that's been done out of the UK, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today really comes from some of that work that's been done in the UK. And in particular, we need to talk about the fact that career-related learning as a term, so not career education, we're not educating them about which jobs to pick necessarily, but career-related learning takes place from a very early age, and it takes place in a huge variety of settings. So at home, in play school and preschool and playgroup, and it also takes place in primary school as well. And primary schools can have this really great role where they can bring some structure and they can start to think a little bit more deliberately about the types of career-related learning that are taking place, make some little tweaks to what's happening, and really maximize the outcomes for young people. Because the other thing that we want to do when we start early, remember I said about challenging stereotypes before, is we want to really broaden horizons. So we know that lots and lots of young people tend to think about the same sorts of jobs, no matter what we do or how many times we talk about them. And I know because I talk about jobs a lot of the time, most of my day is spent talking about jobs. But primary school is a really great time to bring in a wider variety of jobs before they've started to set in stone a few more ideas about what might be possible. We talk about this process of vocational identity crystallization, where things start to solidify, and that happens around the end of primary school and the start of high school. So if we can introduce students to more jobs in primary school, a really broad range of diverse jobs in primary school, we've got more chance of them keeping an open mind and having more options to kind of pick from from after they've crystallized their vocational identity a bit later on. There's been some great work done by the OECD that sort of looks at the later stages of this, and I'll talk a little bit more about primary school in a second, but this is the later stages. And what we know is that across the world, around half of all teenagers aspire to just one of these top 10 jobs. And those top 10 jobs are gender coded. So girls want to aspire to 10 jobs and boys want to aspire to a different set of 10 jobs. And we can see this start to form a lot earlier as well. This isn't something that just occurs. Like, it's not like they turn 15 and they start thinking like this. This happens the whole way through. And we are also seeing that this is getting worse. So this graph shows you that back in the 2000s, less than half of girls and around 44% of boys were thinking about these top 10 jobs, but it's actually the numbers of students who are thinking about those top 10 specific jobs is actually going up. So we're becoming less broad. We're becoming more streamlined in our job selection process as we're going on in time, which is the opposite of what we want. We would like to see these numbers going down, this graph going the other way. And we see the same thing with younger children, which is really scary. There's been quite a lot of research done in the UK with Drawing the Future. And what they did is they asked young children from the ages of 7 to 11 to draw what they wanted to do when they grow up. And they found there was this really strong alignment of gender depending on what they drew. They did some other reimagining the future work as well. And I love this quote. Kids were asked to draw a firefighter, a surgeon, and a fighter pilot. And the vast majority of the pictures that were drawn were of men and not of women. And I know of a friend who does this when he runs workshops with educators, actually. And he asks them to draw a scientist. And it's the same problem. Although people are getting more savvy and a bit more, certainly adults are getting a bit more tuned into it now. They know to try and draw something diverse. But it's still definitely a problem with young kids that we see that even from these really early ages, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, they're already understanding that some jobs are what they see as for boys and some jobs are for girls. So to put all of this into context, to put starting early into context, one of the ways we can do it is by looking at childhood career development as a stage-based process. So it's not this nice, smooth, linear progression where everything happens in line. Everyone's different and all kids are different, but generally we can see that different things happen at different stages as young children grow up. So I break things down into 5 stages. I think this is a great way of kind of giving us enough context and seeing how things happen differently without making it too overwhelming. The first stage I have is from birth until around that kind of 2 years old. You know, like when they're walking really confidently and they're talking pretty comfortably and they're starting to dress themselves and really think about the things that they want to do and develop their own little personalities to kind of that next level. So this is that first stage before they start to do that. At that point, they're really spending the vast majority of time with their family. So a lot of their first kind of ideas about what people can and can't do are formed in the home or they're formed around their family. And this is when they start to build the foundations of personality. Now, a lot of the research out there will say that, oh, no, they don't start developing this till after 2 years old. I've raised 3 children, and I can tell you right now that a 1-year-old has bucket loads of personality. They know the things that they're interested in. They know the toys they prefer, the clothes they want to wear, the things they want to eat. They are well and truly starting to develop their own personalities, between those ages of 0 and 2. So we know that these sorts of things are happening. And the way I describe it is that these young children, what they're doing is they're not necessarily writing a career story yet or writing their story yet. What they're doing is they're developing the characters. So obviously the central character in their story is going to be themselves. They're going to also be thinking about the other people around them, and they're starting to develop the traits that these characters, this person that they're going to become, has, and then that will get used later on in their story. The second stage of childhood career development that we talk about is this preschool stage. So it's after they've started to, they've started to get out more, they've started playgroup, they've started swimming lessons, they've made some of their own little friends, but they haven't embarked on full-time primary education yet. So that's when we have this different set of things happening. And a lot of what happens here is role play, it's dramatic play, and they're getting to try out different skills, different tasks, different things, see what they like and what they don't like, see what kind of behaviors they want to choose to adopt, and then see how they get, what sort of responses they get from adults to those different behaviors. But at that age, they're still thinking of career as this real magic thing. And when I say magic, I don't mean like a wand, a fairy with a wand or anything like that. What I mean is that jobs and work is something that just exists. They don't know how it exists. They don't know why it exists. They couldn't explain all of the things behind it. They just know that it does exist. So it exists as if by magic. And what that means is that when you ask a little toddler what they want to do when they grow up, and lots of adults like to ask toddlers what they want to do when they grow up, that toddler is not, or that preschooler is not thinking about this as a rational adult might, as in, oh, hypothetically, if I had my choice, I would decide to do this when they grow up. It's actually related to the identity. So when you're asking them what do you want to be when you grow up, they're thinking, oh, well, I like being brave and I like being fit, so I think I might want to be a firefighter. Or, oh, I like working with animals, so I want to be a vet because I know that they work with animals. And when they're saying what they want to do, it's not, when we ask 4-year-olds what they want to do when they grow up, it's not really an expression of their career choice like we would expect an adult or an older child to make. They're just saying how they see themselves, right? So that's really important to keep in mind, is that they're actually conflating their identity. And that goes back to those stereotypes that we were talking about earlier. So if they know that they're a girl and it's very important to their identity that they're a girl, then they're going to start thinking that they want to pick jobs that they know girls do and they've seen other girls doing. So we need to, if we're only showing them that girls do jobs like nursing and teacher, then those are the kinds of jobs that they're going to say they want to do because that's how they associate it with their identity. And that's kind of where the problem comes in. And where if we're not talking about these things and we're not trying to be very deliberate in how we talk about careers and very broad and diverse in how we talk about careers, we can be really establishing and entrenching those stereotypes even in preschool. So the third stage we have is primary school. And there's a lot of development that happens from the day they walk in primary school until the day they walk out. My youngest has just finished primary school at the end of last year, and he's very, very different to how he was at the start. But they kind of, while they're in primary school, they're going through this kind of process where a lot of their influences are now from their peers and their friends. Over the duration of primary school, they're starting to compare themselves to others so they can see how they fit. They see where they sit in the class. They start to learn about what they're good at and what their friends are better than them at. And they start to get this really strong idea of who they are in comparison to other people, which is what we need. We need to be able to do that, to understand our unique skills and strengths and then match them to jobs. So this is the process that they're going through in primary school. The other flip side of that is that it means that while they're going through that process, they also start to limit themselves. So they start to think about what they can and they can't do, and they start to tell themselves these stories about, well, I'm not good at that, so that means that I can't go down that particular pathway, or that I shouldn't go down that particular pathway. And by the end of year 6, we know, or the end of primary school or elementary school, we know that in general their vocational identity is probably going to be quite crystallized. And what I mean by that is that they're not necessarily going to pick the job that they want to do at the end of year 6 or the end of primary school and then definitely do that job when they leave school. It's that kind of place that they sit in at the end of primary school is probably where they're going to remain. There might be a little bit of movement one way or the other. It certainly happens for some people, but for the majority of us, we tend to sit in the same sort of places and we tend to be interested in the same sorts of things. So if I think back to when I was in primary school, I think I still am interested in the same sorts of things. I really like reading. I like some sorts of computer games. All of those kinds of things I liked back then, I still like now. And most people, if you ask them where the origin of their real interests come from, they probably had them in primary school. So that's the process that they're going through in that third stage. And then after this, we really see this big shift when they head to high school. It's where they learn to start thinking hypothetically about what might be possible. So not so much in concrete black and whites anymore. And they are also starting to be able to make some decisions about where they want to go and start to write their own stories. But that happens after this stage of the starting early process. That's what comes a bit later in life. And this is the kind of quote that I love to refer to because it really explains what we're trying to do in primary school. We are not trying to ask them to make decisions. We're not trying to change their minds or get them to close off the way they're thinking. We're just trying to make them aware of all of the different possibilities that might be available to them without stereotypes getting in the way, and to really stop them from closing off anything that they don't need to close off before they become a little bit older, a little bit more able to think hypothetically and rationally. All that means is primary school is different. So it's very difficult to approach primary school career education in the same way as we approach secondary career education. We can't just take the programs that are running successfully in secondary schools, simplify them, and then run them in the same way in primary schools. We need to sort of think completely differently because the children are at different stages. They're thinking different things and they need different types of career-related learning and support. The good thing about primary is that unlike secondary, every single teacher has a role to play. So there was some research that's been done recently in Canada, and they asked grade 4 to 6 teachers how they talked about jobs and work in their classrooms. And what they found is that 100% of the teachers that they surveyed said that, yes, they do talk about jobs and work in their classrooms. The majority of them used videos to show different snippets of the real world and of different jobs and things. What that means is that when we're talking about primary school career education, we can include every educator, every teacher, and help them feel more confident with how they talk about different jobs and have more tools and resources to be able to do that. In primary school, they also tend to do a lot more transdisciplinary learning. So you've got one teacher who's teaching everything generally across the curriculum. So it's easier for them to kind of blend things together. And it's also easier for them to start to develop core skills within their curriculum and within their learning as well. Much, much harder for a secondary educator to do that. So what we actually find is that when we go through and talk with a primary school about the sorts of things they're already doing, there's a lot of boxes that we can check. We can already say, oh, well, you're already doing lots and lots and lots of different things related to career-related learning. We just need to be a little bit deliberate about some of them. So this quote really talks about what career education in primary school is about. And it is about asking them to investigate themselves, to find out more about what they're interested in, and to think about the types of life that they might want to lead down the track, which means that we can do these things in primary school. So we can talk about all of the different things that might be possible with them. So we can explain all sorts of different jobs and pathways. We can talk about paid and unpaid. We can talk about self-employment as well. We can talk about the huge range of things that might be open to them down the track. And we can also give them lots of opportunities to try out different skills, different strengths, different tasks, and different clusters. So they can sort of see what fits on them. It's like trying on different uniforms, different clothes, which I know we do a lot of in primary school as well, where you literally get them to try on uniforms. But in doing that, in trying on these different skills, they'll be able to then say, oh, well, that's for me, or I didn't enjoy that very much. And sometimes they uncover these hidden talents or these hidden skills they didn't know they even had, or hidden interests they didn't even know they had. All of this process, this trying on process, really helps them build this really positive and hopefully quite accurate sense of who they are. And that's great because we need that accurate and strong sense of self to be able to crystallize our vocational identity well, which is what's going to happen anyway, but we want it to be accurate, what they're doing. And in primary school, we can also be really open-minded. So they're not having to make any decisions. Nobody's asking them to make any choices or to choose any different pathways. Everyone's going down the same path. So we can be a little bit more open-minded and a little bit free to talk about a whole range of things without having to worry about how that might impact on choices that they make in a couple of years' time. Also means there are some things that we try not to do in primary school. And the more that I talk with schools, the more that I see these sorts of same things coming out. We don't ask them to make any decisions about what they're going to be doing next. That's not what we need to be doing in primary school, because we don't want them to be ruling anything out. We want them to have a whole range of options for the next phase of their education, for whatever it is that they want to do next. So we do things like we don't ask them to take a career quiz. I won't ask primary school students to take a career cluster quiz because I don't want to be getting them to do a quiz that's then giving them a result which they might think is gospel and then making that mean something about themselves. It's too early for that. So we're not going to be doing those kinds of things in primary school context. And we're also not going to be doing things like that are really practical and really much better off at the end of schooling. So things like teaching them how to find a job, teaching them how to navigate the tax system, how to apply for we're not doing that. We're not talking about practical job finding skills. It's more about building core skills, more about understanding what's out there, and little things like being able to make decisions, but not like making decisions about what they want to do next. So what we've found when the process of developing all of these primary school resources is there are some things that we can actually do that are relatively easy. And that's certainly what we've been focusing on at Study Work Grow. The first and the most important is to really amplify what's already happening. So We've been having lots of conversations with groups around the world that have been running pilot programs in primary school career education. And one of the common themes that I find whenever I talk with these groups is that they really focus on amplifying what's already taking place. Because within most primary schools, there's already some really great career-related learning that's happening. So if we can identify it and we can label it and kind of make it clear and explicit for everyone to understand, and then we can amplify it. And by amplifying it, I mean, like, for example, if you're going on an excursion to your workplace, the amplification might be that you just check with the workplace first, then you ask them to bring some extra people in to talk about their jobs for 5 minutes. So if you're going to a supermarket, you might be having the normal tour of the supermarket, but then also ask them if they can bring the accountant down to have a quick chat about the jobs that they do, or an electrical technician come in and talk about how they repair the refrigerators or something like that. So you're just taking what you're already doing and just extending it that little step further and making it a little bit more career related, which is great because the kids enjoy that anyway. The next thing we can do is we connect the curriculum with careers. Lots of teachers are already doing this, but they don't even realize that they're doing it. And there is lots of points within the curriculum where it does ask them to talk about the real world and about different careers. So we can just make that put slightly more emphasis on that, which can then help amplify everything else that's taking place. We also need to talk about building teacher confidence. So one of the things that stands out is that teachers may not feel like career education is something that they're prepared for or something that they know about. And teachers like to feel confident, which makes sense to me. They're standing in front of a class of young people. They want to feel like they know what they're talking about. And if they haven't ever been taught how to deliver career-related learning and haven't been taught about the world of work, that can be a bit of a daunting process. So one of the things we're trying to do is embed professional development and a real sense of understanding within all of the resources. So we're not asking teachers to deliver something that they don't feel confident or they don't feel like they understand completely. And the last thing that we can work on is we can actually review our existing resources within a school to check what's already taking place, because sometimes there are things that are already taking place within a school. I know we talked about amplifying the good stuff that's happening. Sometimes there are things that are taking place within a school that are less than ideal. And if we can have a look at those things that are happening and really identify what's working and what's not, that can be a really great place to start. So there's been a lot of research done into children's books, into the books that we give to young people. Not much yet into other forms of media, digital media and that kind of thing, but certainly into actual books that we use with young people. And what the research shows is that the characters within those books tend to follow the gender stereotypical lines that we follow in the workplace, and that these books actually influence how young people feel about the roles that adults play. So I know there's been a lot of information in the news lately about the banning of a particular book talking about same-sex parenting down in Sydney. I'm so glad that that seems to have been overturned, because we need to have diverse people. We need to have lots and lots and lots of different types of people doing different types of things in our children's books so that children can see that anything is possible. I think I've done a lot of work myself going into libraries and just pulling books off the shelf and then counting how many jobs are in each book, and then also looking at the gender of the characters in the books. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, or if you're not feeling 100% about this yourself, I recommend finding a children's book, whether you've got one on your own bookshelves or if you need to go into a library to go and get one, and have a look and just count. Like, pick up a science book and count the number of girls versus boys and look at the different types of tasks that they're doing. It's really quite enlightening. And this isn't something that just happens in primary school. So there's been quite a lot of research done by some scientists over in WA. And what they did is they looked at the Australian senior curriculum, so years 11 and 12, last 2 years of high school, and all of the different sciences, and they counted the number of scientists that appeared in these curricula, the named scientists. And what they found is that there are 145 scientists named, but only one of them is female. So the problem with this is that this is in the senior curriculum. There already isn't enough time for a teacher to be doing anything that's not explicitly written within the curriculum. Plus, they might not feel confident if they're starting to introduce other things that aren't found in the curriculum. So in saying, well, there's only one female scientist, you're basically telling all of the girls who are studying science that no other women ever get to the highest levels of science. And I know that people, like a teacher, would never want to say that, and they wouldn't ever say it deliberately to their students, but that's what comes across. So this isn't something that we need to just talk about in primary school or in younger years. It's something that continues the whole way through.